Hey, this is Dino. Welcome back to this mini lecture. It's part one of a two-parter. It's titled All the News That's Fit to Fake, the Emergence of Fake News. Basically, it's about fake news. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I'm creating my own fake news. Just joking. Um, I always like to get back to first principles. What is fake news? You might want to pause the video at this moment. Try to define fake news on your own. What do you think it is? Please do not use the Google machine. That would be fantastic. It subverts the whole process, the whole point of this exercise. And also maybe think about any fake news experiences you've had, if any. Hopefully, after coming back after watching the video or pausing the video, hopefully you can define fake news, and hopefully you know a specific instance of fake news. Maybe you know someone propagating something. I had a relative, as an example, who showed an image of a politician dressed up in a certain way where it was obviously photoshopped, and they seemed to believe it, and it didn't look that way, and I would regret not confronting them about that, which is something we might want to do. Hunt in 2016 defined fake news as news that is, one, completely made up, two, designed to deceive readers, and two, three, maximize traffic and profit. Basically, it's fictional. It's intentionally made to deceive readers, and it's made for traffic and online to an increase in traffic would drive profit. If you have a moment, in this series of videos that I have, there's one on fake news headlines from 2016. You can see some examples of some stories that became viral, and some of them, again, I'm sure you've heard some of them. The 2016 election was so full of rancor and division that some of them were obviously really political. Some of them were actually fake, about religious figures and actors endorsing different candidates that I'm sure you've seen or heard of some of them. Hopefully they recall some memories. We're going to talk about how fake news headlines become so big. We're going to go over one reading right now and the other ones in the next session. Again, these readings are dealing with the subject, all the news that fits to fake, the emergence of fake news. Basically, again, they're all about fake news. First article is called How the Google and Facebook era drove news back to yellow press excesses. Main questions are: how did the phenomenon of fake news emerge? Why is this subject important? And how will we cope? Can we even cope? This is an image. I don't know if you could tell what it is. You might want to pause the video to look at it and try to identify what you think it's from and who the characters are. A couple of clues. If you look at their dress, they identify them. Right at the bottom, they factually identify them. The person on the left is Joseph Pulitzer. One on the right is William Randolph Hearst Pulitzer. For many of you who know, he's the supporter and the name of the Pulitzer Prize in journalism, which is like one of the highest, if not the highest, award in journalism, is named after him. On the right, William Randolph Hearst. At the time of the Spanish-American War, this is a cartoon that was put up, and it was them jostling about creating media momentum about the Spanish-American War through fake news to drive circulation. It's a great cartoon. This article deals with questions like what is the yellow press and how has social media impacted the press. Here's a couple quotes that we'll talk about really quickly. Thanks to the filter bubble phenomenon, in which people became increasingly isolated in their own ideological bubble and separated from information that disagrees with their viewpoint, many people still believe these news stories were true weeks after they were exposed by mainstream media. The question from this is there a way to stop this filter bubble where people increasingly become isolated in their own ideological bubbles with people who think similar to them? For both, maybe, ideally there's good filters, bubbles, where it's like people that are, well educated, well informed, who are reasonable, rational, who deal with public discourse in a constructive way. That's good, but is there a problem with that even? Do they miss out on counterpoints? and how do we help people that maybe are more misinformed, less educated, etc. Given that we algorithmically seem to have these algorithms that drive people together, is there a way of using social media to stop that? I think it's really quite hard, in fact, and it's up to you almost to diversify your feeds to find people that are unlike you, which, if you think about it, is really difficult. Here's another quote. A BuzzFeed news investigation found that during the last 3 months of the campaign, again, 2016 campaign for president in the U.S., number one, the top 20 performing fake news stories drove more engagement than the top performing reports from major news outlets. So basically, fake news was more engaging than real news. And based on that, how do we cope? The question is, how do we cope with fake news that's more engaging than real news? There's this idea of clickbait where you sort of sensationalize news to make it more engaging, which becomes, it almost veers into having real news that becomes fake news. If fake news stories, like, they're partly fictional, they play on our biases, they confirm some of our biases, a lot of them are highly entertaining whether you like them or not. How do you cope with that? Where some people, there's this great quote by Kurt Anderson from Studio 360 that everything's entertainment these days. I've read some fake news stories and they're very funny. I like reading them in terms of they're interesting and fun. How do we get people to sort of wean this entertainment in the way that they look at news from good news? Another quote. Instead of going out to report news, our reporters now have to spend a substantial amount of time to verify and debunk rumors. Some are blatantly wrong, but people still read and share them. This is by an anonymous editor. And these fake news problems hardly are new, but are greatly amplified by modern technology. From this, who should debunk fake news? Should we have, say, local journalists who are underpaid and overworked? Should they be spending their time debunking fake news as opposed to going to the local communities and actually finding out and investigating and reporting real news? How do we cope with engagement that amplifies fake news? In this article, they talk about two models, the daily circulation model and subscription model in the past. First quote for number one. To reach the general public, the New York Sun's focus shifted from opinionated commentaries to gossip and news. Stories needed to be sensational, vicious, and eye-catching. Sound familiar? That was, again, the New York Sun in the past. Number two, the subscription model. The subscription model set forth new conditions in which a newspaper's business was aligned with the long-term loyalty of its readers. Daily circulation was no longer the king. Instead, image and reputation was. Oakes, who was in charge of the New York Times, his brilliance was his understanding that the news business was a trust business. The question from this is, which model is predominant today, one or two? Think for a moment, which one do you think, one or two? I would argue that it's number one. People click on websites, they see a story, if they don't want to pay for a paywall, they click on the things they want, and unfortunately, because everything's entertainment these days, if something's sensational, vicious, and eye-catching, man, that is hard to ignore as opposed to reading responsible good news. Quick activity you might want to do on your own about your trusted news sources. Please think about your trusted news sources. And when I mean trusted news sources, I mean you don't worry about factual errors or overbearing bias, and it includes generally high quality information. You might want to pause the video and do this activity, or not. From this, do you have any thoughts on your news sources? Do you have more newspaper outlets more than radio or television? Is public broadcasting something you trust more? Are national and international papers and news sources like maybe CNN, which plays all around the world, maybe the New York Times, which has a global cachet, are those more things you trust more than your local news? Maybe you know local news reporters, you actually have seen them around in your community, maybe you trust them more. Maybe see if there are any trends and patterns. That was all the news that's fit to fake, the emergence of fake news. That was part one. Hopefully come back for part two. My name is Dino. Thank you for listening and watching this mini lesson. Take care.